Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Lawson, we're in the midst of recording
Hello,
two
Kent.
episodes.
How you doing? Good to see you.
Doing great. Did we not clear up who's going to do the intro?
It's Friday, man. Let's go.
We're in the midst of a two-part show series that we're dropping right before Christmas 2024. So if you're listening to this in the future, welcome to the past. If you're listening to this around Christmas, we're talking about gifts that dads can give their families, and not the kind with, pretty ribbons and
boy,
papers.
here we go.
Okay,
no.
sorry. Is that from, who's that? That's the guy with the glasses from like the 70s and 60s.
Bing Crosby?
Roy Orbison. I think that's pretty paper.
Okay.
Not about those kind of gifts. We're talking about the kind of gifts that we give our family that are more meaningful, more personal, more spiritual. And last week we talked about the gift of listening, being a great listener, doing a good job of listening. This week we're going to talk about the gift of being an active and engaged participant. We could call this being a man of action, not being passive, but being active. So as a leader, as a dad, as a husband, can you take Christmas and give your family the gift of action? And one of those actions you could take would be to go to rangeleather.com. You like how I tied that in there, Lawson? Go to rangeleather.com. We love the guys out at Range. They do an amazing job. Their products are great. Their leadership is stellar. We love Kyle, Tim, you guys out there, amazing, doing amazing work. Go to rangeleather.com and use the code MJ15 to get 15% off of your order. Maybe a little too late now for you to order for Christmas, but hey, dads, Valentine's Day is right around the corner. It's like 6 or 7 weeks from now. So go order something cool for your wife at rangeleather.com and use the code MJ15 to save 15%. Lawson, as we talked about getting ready for today's show, looking at the idea of a dad being active, being engaged, not being passive, what are some thoughts that came to mind you want to start us out with?
Yeah, I think it's a two-way connection, giving and receiving, and probably, like we said last time, maybe receiving first from our Heavenly Father in order to be a better gift giver. And in this case, talking about not the gift giving of listening, like we talked about before, but the gift of being an active participant, an engaged dad, a proactively and prepared participant as we go into the holidays. And so, first let's receive and think about what was modeled for us. What did Jesus model about active engagement? How did he go out of his way to meet people? We were talking about how, when he entered a community, he like there's story after story where he just made a beeline for the lost or alone or broken or, hopeless, sick. He designed into his methods ways to approach people versus waiting and sitting and them come to him, so he modeled that for us. And I think it's a thought worthy of consideration as we go into these holidays. Yeah. Jesus didn't come to this earth and become a king who sat upon a throne waiting for the line of procession of people to come and greet him. Right. He was out and about. He was active. He was thoughtful. He was proactive. He went to them. He engaged them. And so, how does God engage us? There are things, I think, that are constantly surrounding us with examples, and we can use some of that God does for us to think about what can we do as we're entering these holidays.
Yeah. And what I find fascinating about when you look at what Jesus was doing, he was often leaving one place, going to another, or entering a town, and he was on the move a lot. He was also, I think what's fascinating about, if you look at his moments in Scripture, you see him get interrupted a lot. which I find fascinating about
good thought.
the one guy who did
Right.
the most important work ever on earth and did it in a very short amount of time. He was on a mission, but his mission involved the people that he bumped into along the way. And so, for example, the way that might help us in the Christmas season is you may be going to your family's house for some Christmas celebration, or you may be going to an event at church and you're going to see a concert, or you're going to go to some, movie or something, and you're going to bump into somebody in the lobby, or you're going to sit next to somebody at the movie theater and realize, oh, we go to church together, or you're going to go to your family's house and that unexpected relative may have come by this year, or you're going to have forgotten, oh, I'm going to see Uncle so-and-so. And those moments just might be God-ordained, orchestrated moments for you to be intentional and take an action where you engage with that person. If you go to your family's house for Christmas and you think, oh, how can I get this over with, 2 hours, and you're watching your clock, or you just show up and you plop down on the couch and, you grab your Diet Coke and you just start watching the game and you sit next to your uncle. Man, can we do better than that? Can we walk in with an attitude of serving, an attitude of maybe doing the setup or the cleanup? Can we walk in with an attitude of maybe questions we want to ask, or ask, that long lost relative how their year's been? Or, can we walk in with more of an active mindset rather than more of a passive mindset? Because I do think that's what Jesus modeled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even if, I think about somebody who's maybe doesn't have big plans for the holidays, and people are away from home, maybe they're overseas, or they're, through separation for whatever reason, they just aren't there. It doesn't have to be walking into a holiday party or a big family dinner. This is a time where people, many people are off work. They've got some quiet time. They've got, it's an opportunity to reflect. People are in the mood to connect. There's story after story out there of people coming together and old wrongs being forgotten, and it's just that season, And so being aware, I think, is a good first step. Being aware that we are entering this time.
Yeah.
We are entering this opportunity period. And then just being, maybe open-minded is the first step toward action. And that is versus, I already know what this is going to be like. I already have my expectations set and decided upon. Nothing's going to change. How I go, by the time January 5th gets here, I know what's going to happen. First, let's just relax and be open-minded and be prayerful, and realize that we have a role, and it doesn't have to be some, grandiose concept, big new idea. It can be some little things that make a big difference. Small changes, consistent over time, can produce dramatic results. You got a thought on that?
Well, I was going to say, what you're reminding me of is one of the stories in Scripture where we see people who ignored a situation several times in a row, and then we see a guy who noticed, like you used that word a minute ago. You said either something like notice or just be aware, look around. I think of the story of Good Samaritan in Luke 10, when Jesus is talking about the beaten guy on the side of the road, and he gets passed over by several people. And then along comes this kind of enemy of his, so to speak, and the Samaritan takes care of him, provides for his lodging, etc., checks back on him, all that. And what I find interesting about that is sometimes we're going to be going to something where we know the reason we're going, and it's fairly plain. I've got to take the casserole to the Christmas party, and I bring the casserole, and I'm holding the casserole, and I walk in, I set the casserole down, like I did my job going to that party. But then, if we just are noticing, if we just kind of have our antenna up, some other things we might notice as we're carrying that casserole in and we're sitting it down, we may notice, man, Uncle Billy seems seems down or seems happy. It doesn't have to be
There
that
you go.
he's,
Right.
necessarily in the bad situation. But I just think about that. The Good Samaritan, he was on a mission, but he noticed. Along the way on his mission, he noticed and he paused and he pressed pause on what he was trying to do, and he attended to the person who needed help.
Yeah, like that was a great example of being an active participant, not passive. Passive doesn't mean necessarily in that case you see something and just kind of glance over there but keep going,
Right.
It's passive can also be even more than that, where you didn't even notice. You didn't even notice the person in need. So
Right.
yeah, like you're talking about, you walk in and maybe see something because you're purposeful and intentional
Yeah.
in being more aware, more active. And what that can lead to is not only a better situation, but it can change your heart.
Yeah.
It can change your heart in advance so that it's not like I was talking about, like, I know what to expect. It's going to be the same thing. Like you had mentioned, like, it's only 2 hours. We can get through this. And I know what it's going to be afterwards. Well, maybe we change our heart a little bit and ask for, some divine help to prepare us to be a difference maker in those
Yeah.
situations, and not come in and plop down, take a seat, tick tock, the clock is running, the sooner we get out of here, the better. Maybe you go in differently and say, I'm going to just do one thing different. And I'm going to, as soon as I walk in, my awareness, my antenna are up. Where is God pointing me to be engaged? That could be with your kids. It could be your kids
Right.
witnessing you talking to that very difficult uncle, that
Yeah.
always does whatever. Movies are made out of that kind of situation, where it's just this dysfunctional family and one thing happens the next, and it's just this hilarious, mixture of craziness. Well, we all have we're all crazy. And when you put us all together in the holidays, it can be an opportunity that is ripe for us to be different. And I think that's kind of one of the underlying points. How can we be different than the past, what we've been? What can our role be as dads to lead our family in a way that honors God differently than maybe we have, on our minds right now?
Yeah. Well, and that idea of noticing, you said it a minute ago that I want to double click on for a dad who may think, well, I'm not really good at that, or that's not my A game, or I'm focused, or I'm type A, or whatever his, excuse might be. Sorry, Dad. Would be, sometimes we need to ask God to help us notice, get upstream of our own sort of personality and our own sort of quirks and our own sort of mission, and say, hey, God, I'm walking in to this situation, or I'm going to be going to a coffee shop today. Would you help me notice somebody around me who needs me to take action, who needs me to be active, and to walk up to them and ask them a question? I think, partly I think of this because you can't hear this on the radio. I probably sound very tall to the listener. However, I'm not. I'm actually quite short. And so one of the guys I love in Scripture is I love Zacchaeus, this tax collector who says he couldn't see over the crowd, so he climbed up the tree. And then we see Jesus notices him. Jesus notices him. Now, it might be because he's this crazy guy hanging from a tree. I mean, maybe he was very hard to not notice. Having said that, I just love the idea that Zacchaeus tried to get noticed and he got noticed. But that's because, Jesus was looking for people to serve and to help. If Jesus had been noticing the important people, or the religiously elite, or the powerful, man, that's a different setting in your mind. And we've all been there, man. I know if we have a lot of dads who listen to this show who are probably in like a business context, and we've all been in those rooms where, you're middle of the totem pole or you're bottom of the totem pole, and you're talking to another guy, and all of a sudden he notices the boss walk in or something like that, and he peels off, just stops, ignores you completely, and goes and pays close attention to the power in the room. We've all been there. I'm sure I've probably done that. For sure. And I remember my old pastor, Bob Russell at Southeast Christian, the church when he led it got to thousands of people. It was this massive church. And when you would see Bob in the lobby, And if you went up and engaged him one-on-one and started having a conversation, one thing I noticed about him that was fascinating to me is hundreds of people, if not dozens of people, if not hundreds, would walk past the two of you while he was talking to you. And a lot of them would gesture to him, like wave, or they might even tap him on the shoulder, or they may say, "Hey, Bob." He never looked at them. He never noticed them. Now, I bet he noticed them. I'm not saying he didn't notice.
Right.
But he was so focused
Yeah.
on talking to you, actually uncanny focused. And at one point, I remember walking across the steps of the church one time, and there were still hundreds of people in this service after a service when Bob was still preaching. And I was walking up and down some steps to get around a big crowd, and I was coming down the steps and I missed a step. And I had this super awkward, like, where I almost fell flat on my face. And I was probably 20 yards from Bob, and I kept walking, and my path was going to take me past him, but he was talking to somebody else. And just as I got near him, his conversation ended, and he turned to me and he goes, "You didn't think I noticed that, did you? About killed yourself on those steps," which was hilarious. And I was like, darn, man, I thought I totally got away with that. So he was noticing,
Right.
but he didn't let himself get distracted by the person right in front of him. And sometimes that's fascinating to me about Jesus. In the case of like Zacchaeus, Jesus was surrounded by people in that moment. He had a lot of people clamoring and wanting his attention, but he noticed this guy who'd made an extra effort to be able to be seen by him. And that story's always fascinated me. And I want to be more like that. I want to be the guy, and I'll come back to what you said. Maybe we need help. Maybe we need to walk into some of these holiday events, and maybe you're hearing this in March or July, and you just need to be a better noticer of people around you.
Right. A better noticer. I like that. That's a good point though. It's like how do we roll through our day? And now, if you're off working, you're going to some holiday things or whatever, it takes a little bit of effort to change your mind, change your mindset. I've got a buddy, Peter, who for Thanksgiving dinner, everybody knows the rules for coming over to dinner. Couple things. Number one, dress up. He just likes it. He just thinks there's something mental that goes on when people put on their nice clothes and show up for dinner. And the second is love on your mother. That's just 2 rules for coming over for family Thanksgiving.
So good.
And the point I'm making is he communicates that in advance. Like it's a part of the prep.
Yeah.
And so, that's not necessarily the point of the story is not what he did. It's how he set the tone. And
Yes.
so part of that is communicating in advance, maybe coming up with something in your mind. You put in the show notes the difference between a thermostat and the thermometer,
Yeah.
where one changes what the temperature is and one records it. I want you to talk about that in the context of like an active engagement is more than participation. It takes some thought. It takes a little bit of prep. And again, I'm not talking about grandiose ideas or it's making some huge statement. It can be little things like writing note cards or planning a prayer for the Thanksgiving dinner. It's going to be coming your way.
Right.
Well, maybe put a little extra
Don't
thought
be surprised.
into it, thinking about who's going to be there and maybe what they're going through and challenging yourself to not just like pray about it in advance and prepare in advance.
Right.
So talk about, let's get into some of the ideas, but I love that thought of thermostat versus thermometer.
Well, and I think my son Alex, who's doing some post-edit work on our podcast, he might have typed it into the show notes. And I think he actually might even think he heard that from like a professor or some other guy in his life. But I probably told that professor that. So like Alex doesn't even understand. Upstream from most of his smart comments is probably me. So he just needs to get his act together.
But I'm on your side, Alex. I think this is an original thought.
It's not at all. Golly, what's really funny is I'm kidding about that because I have no idea who I first heard that from, but it certainly was not an original Kent Evans thought. But it's a really handy metaphor because we all have interacted with thermostats and thermometers. We know the difference. One reflects the temperature, one controls it. And I've heard that said so many times. Preachers have used it for years as a metaphor, and it's so effective. But what I think you got to do is you got to go one step further. So today, my son Titus, who's 9, had just finished a kids' Bible study on the book of Jonah. And I asked him, he was very proud to have finished it. And so I said, hey, what did you learn from your book study in Jonah? And he first said, I don't know. And I'm like, nope, that's not good enough. Like, you're not eating lunch unless you give me, So I leaned on him a little and he goes, okay, don't be angry. He said something else. And then he said, and don't run from God. Now, what's interesting about that, right? Here's what's interesting about that is, when he said those things, those are right, those are correct. However, they don't exactly lead to action because they're stated in terms of the negative. Don't be angry. Don't run from God. And he's actually not far away. What was the second one, Titus?
Don't have a bad attitude.
He said, don't have a bad attitude. There we go. So thank you for clarifying that. He's not too far away. So what we've got to do, though, right? Thermostat, thermometer. How do we do that? So what I asked him to do is I asked him to invert each of those and tell me, therefore, what could he do? He goes, oh, okay, I can have a good attitude. That was his inverse of bad attitude. I could be happy. That was his inverse of anger. And he could say, and I could do what God says. That's his inverse of don't run from God, which is way more actionable. To get back to the topic of today's show, way more actionable than I'm going to stop being angry. I'm going to stop being volatile. I'm going to stop being selfish. I'm going to stop being greedy. I'm going to stop being lustful, whatever your stop is. Instead, what's the inverse? So if you want to be the thermostat, I almost said the wrong word. If you want to be the thermostat, what does that look like?
Yeah.
What are some things that a godly, active, non-passive participant in Christmas, say, for example, at this season, what do those look like? And so you mentioned a couple already. Some others might be, do we schedule?
Hang on before we get into that. This
I can't do that yet?
I want to double down on the thermostat. I need to change my own thermostat before I go into the room where the holiday dinner is going to be and try to change that thermostat.
Good point. Right.
I need to think in advance and prepare myself. I'm going to warm up. I'm not going to turn the thermostat down and be my normal cold self and just get through this thing. I'm going to be a warmer person because you are then therefore going into the situation and changing the environment there.
Yeah. That's right.
And so prepare yourself, I guess, is my first point. I'd love to go through them. There's some good ideas, some practical app ideas that dads may want to latch onto. One of them is by preparing your heart, preparing yourself, what you can do is write some note cards, some individual.
That's right.
I mean, how unexpected would it be?
Yeah.
To go into that situation and hand someone and hand the next person and hand a note card to somebody else that is personal to them, that changes a lot, dude. That has the ability to impact and you being an active participant walking in, and that changes things. That's the thermostat at work. Like, go ahead and diffuse some situation by just handing a sweet little card. Doesn't have to be a 2-page letter, just something nice, kind, prayerful, scripture, whatever. That's a good way of I'm going to enter a situation in a different way than I would have normally or prior.
Along those lines, Lawson, a Bible verse that's been on my mind a lot in the last, year or so, partly because I don't feel like I live it out very well. And it's one of those kind of convicting verses for me that as I'm growing, I want to be more and more like this verse, is in Romans 12:10. And that verse says this: love one another with brotherly affection. And the second half says, outdo one another in showing honor. And I like to kid around. I like to be sarcastic. I like to joke a lot. And so sometimes I'm the guy you can count on for a wisecrack, at the party, and I'll make the party laugh centered, but I can occasionally do that at someone else's expense. Not like super critical or hateful or tearing people down in public, but like, I don't think people would say, oh yeah, the verse I think of when I think of Ken Evans is Romans 12:10, outdo one another in showing honor. Like nobody says that. And I really want to be better at that. And to your point, like a note card or something simple can show honor. We shot a digital course back in September at one of our donor families' homes, who are amazing people. They did a great job. And one of the guys who was there to shoot, there were like 15 people in the room. And at the end of the night, we had a dinner together. And he went around the room. His name's Joe. And Joe went around the room. Joe Pellegrino, by the way, at Legacy Minded Ministries. Go check him out. Legacy Minded Ministries, great guy. And Joe went around the room, and probably for 15 or 20 people, he went person by person and said something edifying and beneficial about each person in the room. And it was unique. It wasn't just like, oh, Lawson's a great guy. I mean, he's just a good guy. What a great guy, that Lawson. It was more specific. And it was tailored often to the last couple days we'd spent together shooting these videos. He even reached back into the archives mentally a little bit with some of the guys in the room who he knew better and said, oh, this guy's the real deal and all that. And man, he just showed honor for like 20 straight minutes. He went person by person in the room. And what's interesting about him is he's a magnetic guy. He's a convener. He's a guy that people want to be around. That's part of the reason, is because he's actively engaged in showing honor to people around him. And so often at the holidays, we can be actively engaged in just what we're going to get, or we can be actively engaged in maybe it's the sadness of the season or the financial pressure or your job or whatever. And it takes a special kind of prep moment, as you say, to walk into an environment ready to show honor, ready to edify, ready to lift up and bless other people.
Man, that right there might be just the point of this episode. Let's wrap our thoughts around how do we do that? How do we honor and edify other people? Note cards could be fine. You could also write it down to yourself or put it in your notes on your phone so that when you see them, you've got handy a reminder of something particular to each of those folks. It could be easy too. Like, what do you do the morning of Christmas prior to gift opening? Is there something that you can, set the tone with? Maybe it's a word or a scripture reading or a prayer about gift giving or receiving or, something to take the emphasis or the focus off just what's in the box.
Yeah.
We've got, in our family, my youngest is dating a guy, and he literally yesterday landed in the Middle East in Qatar. Some folks pronounce it Qatar, but he's a long, long way from home. And we're gonna schedule like a FaceTime or a Zoom, and that takes some thought. It takes a little bit of prep. Who in your life? The other reason we're doing it, the main reason it came to us, is because our oldest is going to still be away from home, not coming home for the holidays. She has to work, a lot going on. She can't make it. We're going to do a trip maybe later, but not during actual Christmas.
Yeah.
And so we want to pre-plan some, involving them, engaging them, including them. And so what else could you do?
Yeah.
Is there, we talked about a special prayer. We talked about maybe is there any ritual that is important? It's funny, 15 years into something, your kids start to look forward to that moment that they know is coming. Maybe it's a corny thing dad does, or it's something that's really meaningful and they look forward to it. Maybe they've prepared their heart because of that ritual. If you're missing some sort of like a standing thing that happens every birthday, every Christmas, every, Mother's Day, where the same thing, this is what I'm talking about, the same thing can be expected.
Yeah.
Think of that. Ask around. What do other people do? Can't you guys have a big family? I'm certain, like, you've got this the compliment jar in your house, I think,
Well,
or something like that.
What's interesting is April is one of the most intentional people I've ever been around. And I don't say that just because she's my wife or because she listens to the show. But hi, honey. Good to see you. Merry Christmas. Okay. But I say that because like even she'll do, one of the things that just popped into my head is she will do an Advent calendar. We have a snowman. It's a physical, like 3-dimensional little box. He looks like a big snowman. It's got little drawers in it. And you pull a drawer out for December 1st, for December 2nd. And throughout that Advent calendar, there'll be some days where it's like special treat night, or there'll be some days where there's a little gift you get before Christmas, maybe 2 weeks early, and it's something small. One of the things she puts in that Advent calendar, usually about every 5 or 6 days, so about 4 or 5 times, is show the love of Christ, or give the gift of the love of Christ to somebody today. So you'll open the drawer, and there's a little angel figurine in that day's drawer, and that means you're going to show the love of Christ. And it could be that she's baked cookies and we're going to walk them around to the neighbors in our 2 cul-de-sacs and hand out cookies. Or it could be that we're going to write a note to somebody who we know needs to be encouraged. And man, you just talk about intentional and action-oriented. My wife's amazing at that. And my boys have been doing that ever since they were born, basically. Like Alex has 25 years of this almost. I don't think he remembers it when he was 1 year old, but she was been doing that forever. And there are things like that are staples around the Evans house, not because we've tried to make them these elevated things to like idolize the snowman jar, but because we've just decided, man, that's a great time to go and do some things at Christmas time where you can be action oriented, you can be intentional, or you could do those in August or you could do those in May, but just life gets in the way. So we focus on some of that stuff around Christmas, like we might not focus on it throughout the year.
Yeah, and as we kind of think about wrapping up not just this episode but this year, that's another good opportunity where people sometimes take as a like, here's what I've been doing, here's kind of what I want to think about or work on as we go into the next year. The old New Year's resolutions. People are just open-minded now in this time of year as we wind a year down. And so let's think about that and understand just the vibe. General vibe is like, we've had a X fill in the blank year, and now we're preparing for the next. I think there's an opportunity for us as dads to use this in a way that honors God, that brings, joy to our family, that brings people together. It takes some intentionality. It takes being proactive. It takes an active, engaged dad. But as a father, our responsibility is leadership. Yeah. And if in your life you have thought about, God, I really messed that up, or I really missed that opportunity, it's not ever too late to give it another go. Right. And so, I think this has been for you and me, 50 some shows, 50 times you and me have come together and talked. And dude, I'll just tell you.
Did you say 50? I think what you meant was 50. 180.
No, I said this year, dummy.
Oh, sorry. Got it. I didn't know if you could count that high. Continue. I know.
It's been years. Years. So many years with you. And so, look, we're wrapping this year up. This podcast is such a blessing for me. I just pray and pray and pray that God is using it, and I know He is. He can use anything, even us, even us, to do His work. And He has worked on my life through you, Kent. It's been it's a real blessing.
Absolutely.
But so as we're wrapping today up, you guys, it's not too late. The smallest thing can matter. Yeah. Make an effort. Think about how do you change your own thermostat first and adjust to whatever is going on in your own life. Put other people first. Pray. How can I honor you? How can I honor you, Lord? How can I bring joy into my family
Yeah.
that otherwise wouldn't be done if I'm not the guy. If I don't do it, how can I be the difference maker? And God will reveal to you through an open heart what exactly each person that you interact with, whether they're a stranger or a daughter or a wife or a crotchety old uncle, whatever it may be.
Why is it always the uncle? There's always an uncle that we got to make.
Well, it's probably statistically, I bet there's more uncles out there causing problems.
Probably.
Yeah.
Well, and I would add to that, Lawson, 2 thoughts as we wrap up. One is, I'm not a super huge fan of what I would call New Year's resolutions, but I am a super huge fan of New Year's contributions. So feel free to go to manhoodjourney.org/donate. If you're looking for a way to help out a ministry at the end of the year, we could be one of them. Why not?
How did I not know you were going down that path ahead of time? For end of year.
I have a quota. I have a certain quota. A number of times I've got to talk about donating. The show is brought to you by other people who've donated to make this show possible. So get out there and support it. Come on, let's go. /donate, manhoodjourney.org/donate. But on a serious note, which that is serious, we do need to keep the lights on around here. But on a more personal note, I should say, if you'd like to take a significant challenge connected to today's episode. Here's the significant challenge, and I'm gonna give it to you in a way where you don't even have to do it. You could actually play it for your wife. So here's what we're gonna do. Take the next 45 seconds or a minute after I'm done with this little preamble and play this section for your wife. Pause the show, go find your wife and play this section, and here it goes. Okay, I'm gonna say something that your wife can hear, and then you're going to receive after I'm done talking. So here we go. Hey, your husband wants to know something about himself, and he's brave and courageous and strong. Therefore, he wanted you to listen to what I'm about to say next, and that is, dear wife, what is one area where your husband could be more action-oriented that would benefit your family? What is just one, not 17 now, lady, take it easy, but what is one way that you could say to him, he's going to pause the show right here in a minute on his iPhone. He's going to pause it, and you're going to start talking. What is one way that he could be more action-oriented as a husband or a father that would bless and impact your family? I dare you, Dad, to go play that for your wife and see what she says next. Because sometimes others around us can more accurately diagnose and easily tell us where we're being passive, where we could be more active. And sometimes what we think is active is not bad, but may not be the thing that our family needs the most. And often our wives have a really good sense of that. Play that last stretch for your wife. If you want, play it real fast and skip the wife part. Play it for your older kids. They can tell you the same thing. Dad, thanks for listening, man. Go share the show with somebody. Thanks for joining us. It's the end of 2024. Hope you've had a very good 2024. And we will see you on the other side, Lord willing, in 2025 with a brand new set of episodes to help you not be a father on accident, but be a father on purpose. See you soon. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in.
We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed.
Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.
I'm just trying to be a good podcaster.